right. So today we're going to be doing a deep dive into Frankenstein.
Okay.
But not the whole thing. We're going to be focusing specifically on part 4.
Okay.
And that is the part where the creature gets to tell his side of the story.
Interesting.
So we're going to be using excerpts from the book itself.
Okay.
And we're also going to be looking at some academic commentary to kind of help us unpack all this stuff. So
yeah, part 4 is it's really interesting because you get that layered narrative that Shelley is so good at it.
It's true.
You're not just getting Victor Frankenstein's side of the story anymore.
Right.
You get to hear from the creature himself, and that I think it adds a whole other dimension to the story, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like, you think you're reading a history book and you think, you know, what happened. And then all of a sudden you find out new information. You're like, whoa, okay, wait a minute.
Yeah. It's like suddenly you're hearing from, both sides of a debate or something like that.
Exactly. But it's not just about like hearing his side of the story, right?
No, not at all.
It's how he tells it.
Exactly.
That I think is really fascinating.
Yeah. And one of the, I think, the most powerful techniques she uses is these comparisons to these really well-known figures, Adam from the Bible, Lucifer, the fallen angel.
Yeah.
It's not just a random choice. These allusions are really key to understanding the creature's whole internal struggle, I think.
Okay, so unpack that a little bit.
Okay.
So we have he's comparing himself to Adam.
Right.
Okay, so he's
cast out of paradise.
Yeah, cast out.
Yeah.
But then he's also comparing himself to Lucifer.
Right.
Who is
the rebel, yeah.
Yeah, the ultimate rebel.
The ultimate rebel, yeah.
So what is Mary Shelley trying to do here?
Well, I think she's really trying to make us question our own assumptions about good and evil, like creation and destruction, Think about it, like the creature, just like Adam yearns for his creator's love, yearns for a place in the world.
Right.
But he's also consumed by this sense of abandonment and rage, kind of like Lucifer, which, leads him down a much darker path.
Okay, so it's not as simple as saying he's a monster.
Yeah.
He's got this complex mix of emotions and stuff. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
And this idea of these biblical parallels makes it seem like it's making us question, is he inherently evil or is he a product of his circumstances?
Or both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this really ties into this whole idea of othering.
Yes.
That we see throughout the book.
Definitely. And othering is, it's essentially just that process of creating an us versus them mentality.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And that's so often based on, fear or prejudice.
Right.
And when we label individuals or groups as different or as outsiders or even as threats,
Right.
And it's really that fear that leads to rejection and isolation, which we see play out, tragically with the creature.
Yeah. And we see this all the time, in the real world.
Totally.
I mean, just think about how certain groups
absolutely
are portrayed in the media.
Yeah, all the time.
Or how easily we stereotype people, we don't even know or we don't understand. And it's often, like you were saying, it's stemmed from this fear of the unknown.
Right.
Like the fear that people have of the creature.
Exactly. It's that fear, that instinct to is so deeply rooted in human history.
Yeah.
I think Shelley was really tapping into something primal here with this, even something like, the movie Highlander plays on this idea, remember how Connor MacLeod is exiled from his village just because he's immoral, different, it's the same core fear, I think, driving those actions.
Totally. Yeah. And that kind of brings us to, the creature's interactions with the impoverished family that he's been observing.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't think that a monster would be capable of empathy, but here we see something quite different.
I know. This is where I think the story takes a really interesting turn.
Yeah.
The creature, despite this monstrous appearance, exhibits, I think, genuine compassion.
Yeah.
He's drawn to the family's kindness.
Right.
And it really seems to awaken the sense of morality within him.
Yeah.
He even stops stealing their food when he realizes it's causing them hardship.
Yeah. He goes from this terrifying figure in the shadows to secretly helping them.
Yeah.
By gathering firewood.
I know.
And so it really makes you wonder, if he's capable of these acts of kindness,
right,
is he really the monster that everybody thinks he is?
Right. It really challenges, I think, our assumptions about who
Yeah.
or what a monster truly is, you know? And I think it forces us to look inward and ask ourselves, are we judging based on appearance, or are we truly seeing the individual?
Yeah. And are we othering those who don't fit into our ideas of, what's acceptable or what's normal or whatever?
Totally.
And speaking of challenging assumptions,
yeah,
let's talk about how the creature learns language.
Oh, yeah.
He doesn't have textbooks.
Right.
He doesn't have teachers.
No.
He just observes the family and he figures it all out.
It's pretty remarkable, isn't it?
It's pretty amazing. I mean, it's like he's cracking this code,
Totally.
It's like he's deconstructing these,
the building blocks.
Yeah, the building blocks of language, and then figuring out
how to use them.
Yeah, and it makes you appreciate just the complexity of communication and, all this stuff that we
take for granted.
Yeah, we take for granted, yeah.
Right.
So he's not just learning how to speak.
Right.
He's learning the art of persuasion.
He is, yeah.
He's learning the power of rhetoric, really.
And he's doing it all without realizing it.
Right.
Right. He's seeing how the family's using language to persuade, to comfort, to, express their emotions.
Yeah.
And starting to grasp, I think, these subtle ways that language can shape thoughts and influence behavior.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And that raises a question.
Yeah.
Does his ability to communicate,
right,
to express himself eloquently, does that change how the family perceives him? Does it actually make a difference in the end?
That's where I think the real tragedy lies. Yeah. Because despite mastering language, despite being able to articulate his feelings and his experiences, he's still met with that, fear and rejection.
Right.
And this, I think, leads to a really crucial turning point in the story, one that I think will really resonate with you.
Okay.
It's interesting because for a long time, the creator isn't even aware of his own monstrosity, quote unquote,
Yeah.
It's not until he actually sees his reflection for the first time that this really hits him.
And that's a pivotal moment in the book.
It is.
He's been observing this family.
Right.
He's been absorbing their language and their culture.
Right.
But he hasn't really, grasped the concept of beauty and ugliness until he sees himself through their eyes.
Exactly. And that's where, those societal standards of beauty really come cracking down on him, I think.
Right.
He's internalized these standards through watching the family.
Yeah.
And then he realizes that he doesn't fit the mold, you know? It's like a double rejection, right?
Yeah.
First by his creator and now by the very society he longs to be a part of.
Yeah. And it makes you think about how much our self-perception is shaped by,
by the world around us.
Yeah. Yeah. If he had never seen his reflection, would he have felt like a monster?
Right. That's such a fascinating question.
Yeah.
I think it really highlights just how much our sense of self is constructed through those interactions, through the messages we receive about what's acceptable and what's not.
Totally.
And this ties back to what we were talking about before, the entering.
Right.
It's not just about physical appearance.
Right.
It's about any perceived difference that can be used to exclude or marginalize individuals or groups,
Totally. And this whole internal conflict, wanting to connect with the family.
Yeah.
Knowing that his appearance might make that impossible.
Right.
This is a perfect example of what Kenneth Burke called dialectic motives.
Yes.
Can you kind of break that down?
Yeah.
I have to admit, this is one of those concepts that makes my head spin a little bit.
I can see why Burke's ideas can be a bit dense.
Yeah. So just explain it for the layman. Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, Burke argued that human beings are driven by these opposing forces, these internal tensions that shape our actions and our motivations. You know?
Okay. So in the creature's case, it's this pull between wanting love and acceptance, but also fearing rejection because of how he looks.
Exactly. Yeah. He wants to belong, but he also knows that he represents something that people find terrifying.
Right.
And, these dialectic motives aren't, they're not static.
Right.
They're constantly in flux. Sometimes they clash.
Yeah.
Sometimes they find a kind of uneasy balance, but they're always there.
Yeah.
Kind of driving us forward.
Okay. So it's not about just being purely good or purely evil.
Right.
It's about navigating these complex forces.
It's about the gray areas.
Yeah, the gray areas. And it's not just limited to Frankenstein.
No.
You see this in pop culture all the time.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Like Spock from Star Trek.
Oh, yeah.
He's always struggling to reconcile
right.
His Vulcan logic.
Right.
Where it's like with his human emotions.
His human emotions. Yeah. It's a classic Burkean struggle. And it's part of what makes that character so compelling.
Right.
You know, he never fully eliminates one side or the other. Right. It's about finding a way to integrate them to be both Vulcan and human.
Yeah, it's like, those two sides are always kind of, in tension with each other.
Totally.
Yeah, and you see that.
Yeah, and you see a similar thing with Data in Star Trek: The Next Generation, Yeah. He's constantly striving to understand and experience human emotion to become more like his creators, even though he knows he can never truly be one of them.
Yeah, and what about Professor Hulk?
Oh, Professor Hulk, yeah.
From the Avengers movie.
Right.
That's kind of like the embodiment of...
He's the embodiment of integrating these seemingly opposite forces.
So, Banner's intellect merged with Hulk's strength.
Exactly. Creating something new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we apply this back to the creator, it's not just about him wanting acceptance, it's about him wrestling with these larger existential questions.
Exactly.
Like, what does it mean to be human?
Yeah.
How do I reconcile the different parts of myself?
Right.
How do I find a place in the world that seems to define me,
right.
Based on my differences?
Exactly. And the tragedy is that he's denied that opportunity for growth and integration because of the fear and rejection that he encounters.
Right.
It's like society's fear becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy by treating him as a monster. Right. They push him further down that path.
And it's heartbreaking because you can see these glimmers of humanity in him.
Yeah.
There are these moments of genuine kindness.
Right.
And empathy.
Absolutely.
But it's almost as if the fear he encounters kind of snuffs out those sparks.
Right. And that brings us back to this idea of the power of narrative.
Right.
Shelley's decision to actually give the creature a voice to let him tell his own story, I think is so crucial here.
It totally shifts our perspective.
Absolutely.
We're no longer relying on Victor Frankenstein's biased account of what happened.
Right.
We're hearing directly from the creature.
Exactly.
And that forces us to confront our own prejudices and assumptions.
It does.
It's like she's saying, don't take Victor's word for it.
Right.
Dig into the creature.
Right.
See him as more than just a monster.
Yeah. And in doing so, she's challenging us to think critically about how we perceive and how we treat those who are different from us.
And that message is just as relevant today
Totally.
as it was 2 centuries ago.
Absolutely.
I mean, we still live in a world where people are quick to judge and label others based on these superficial differences.
Right, yeah.
But by understanding the creature's struggles, by empathizing with his yearning for connection, I think we can start to break down those barriers and build a more compassionate and understanding world.
Totally.
So it's a reminder that autheriness is often a construction.
Yeah.
It's a way of creating distance and justifying fear.
Right.
And the more we can see the humanity in those that we perceive as different, the less likely we are to fall into that trap.
Totally.
But let's shift gears for a moment and delve into something that I find absolutely fascinating.
Okay.
Which is the creature's journey of language acquisition.
Yeah.
So he goes from observing this family from afar to mastering their language just by watching and listening.
It's incredible, isn't it?
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And it speaks volumes, I think, about just the power of the human mind.
Absolutely.
To learn and to adapt.
Yeah. He starts by paying attention to the sounds they make.
Yeah.
Trying to connect those sounds to the objects and the actions that they represent.
Right.
It's like he's creating his own mental dictionary.
Yeah, it's like he's cracking a code, deciphering the language with any formal instruction.
Right.
And it makes you wonder, what does this experience tell us about language itself?
Yeah.
Is it something we're hardwired for?
Right.
Or is it purely a product of our environment?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a debate that's been raging for centuries.
Yeah.
But the creature's journey certainly highlights the importance of both, nature and nurture in language acquisition.
Right.
He clearly has this innate capacity for language, but it's triggered and shaped by his observations of the family.
Right. And it's not just about learning vocabulary and grammar.
It's not. It's about picking up on those subtle nuances of communication.
Yeah.
The ways that language is used to express emotions, to persuade others, to build relationships. And like, he's intuitively grasping the art of rhetoric, even before he knows what rhetoric is.
Right, yeah. Right. So this newfound understanding of language, it kind of fuels his desire.
It does.
To connect with the family.
Yeah.
To share his story.
Yeah.
To make them understand.
Yeah.
Who he is and what he's been through.
Right.
He believes that if he can communicate with them on their level, that maybe they'll finally see past his monstrous exterior.
Yeah.
It's almost like he's thinking, now that I can speak your language, now that I can express myself eloquently, maybe you'll finally see me, hear me, understand me.
Right.
But of course, things don't quite go as planned, do they?
Sadly, no.
Yeah.
And that's where we see, I think, the limitations of language.
Right.
The heartbreaking truth that even the most eloquent words cannot always overcome that deeply ingrained prejudice and fear.
Right.
It's almost like he's thinking, if I can just explain myself, if I can just make them see the real me, then everything will be okay, But that hope, that belief in the power of language to bridge the divide is really shattered.
Yeah.
When he finally tries to approach the family.
And this is where the story takes a really tragic turn.
Yeah. I mean, armed with his newfound eloquence, the creature approaches the family, convinced that he can reason with them, appeal to their empathy, but instead of understanding, he's met with terror and violence.
It's such a gut-wrenching scene.
I know.
Because he can just sense the creature's hope and vulnerability in that moment.
Totally.
He's putting himself out there, exposing his deepest desires.
Right.
And only to be met with rejection and brutality.
And it really underscores the limitations of language, the fact that words alone can't always overcome those deeply ingrained prejudices and fears.
Right. No matter how eloquently he speaks.
Exactly.
No matter how convincingly he argues.
Yeah.
They just can't
see past it.
Yeah. And so that kind of brings us to this core question.
Yeah.
That Shelley, I think, is posing. What if the creature had been met with compassion instead of fear?
It's the ultimate what if, isn't it? Like, if the family, if society as a whole had chosen empathy over fear, could his path have been different?
Yeah. Could he have become a compassionate being?
Right.
He seemed capable of being.
Exactly.
Because, I mean, his descent into violence and despair doesn't feel inevitable.
It doesn't, no.
So it feels like a direct consequence of the rejection and isolation.
Right, of how he's treated.
He experiences it,
Shelley's not presenting him as inherently evil.
Right.
She's showing us how his environment, how he's treated by others, shakes him.
Right.
Into the monster that he ultimately becomes.
Right. And this is where I think Frankenstein transcends its time.
Yeah.
It becomes this timeless commentary on the human condition.
Absolutely. It's a warning, about the dangers of othering, of dehumanizing those who are different, of allowing fear to dictate our actions and shape our perceptions.
It's a plea for empathy.
Yes.
For understanding, for recognizing the shared humanity that connects us all.
Right.
Regardless of, outward appearances or perceived differences.
Right.
Because the creature, I mean, despite his monstrous exterior, ultimately reflects, I think, our own desires for connection.
Absolutely.
For acceptance, for belonging.
Yes, and his story serves as a powerful reminder, I think, that the choices that we make, the way that we treat each other, have profound consequences.
Yeah, it's not just about individual acts of kindness.
Right.
It's about creating a society where, empathy and understanding are the norm.
Sure.
And the exception.
Right.
It's about creating a society where we don't allow fear to turn us into the monsters we fear.
That we fear, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like he's saying, if I can just explain myself, if I could just make them see the real me, then everything will be all right.
Right.
But that hope, that belief in the power of language to bridge that divide,
it's
it's shattered when he tries to approach the family.
It is, and it's it's really where the story takes this tragic turn.
Right.
You know, he's armed with his newfound eloquence. He approaches the family. He's convinced that he can reason with them.
Right.
That he can appeal to their empathy.
Yeah.
But instead of understanding,
right.
he's met with terror and violence.
Yeah, and it's a gut-wrenching scene.
I know.
Because you can really sense the creature's hope and vulnerability.
Totally.
You know, he's putting himself out there.
He is.
He's exposing his deepest desires.
Right.
Only to be met with rejection and brutality.
And it really, I think, underscores the limitations of language.
Right.
The fact that words alone can't always overcome that deeply ingrained prejudice and fear.
No matter how eloquently he speaks.
Exactly.
No matter how convincingly he argues.
Right.
They just can't see past it.
They can't. And it raises this question, you know.
Right.
What if he had been met with compassion?
Right. What if the creature had been met with compassion instead of fear?
Instead of fear. You know, if the family had, if society had chosen empathy over fear, could his path have been different?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
could he have become the compassionate being he seemed capable of?
Right. Because his descent into violency, despair.
Right.
It doesn't feel inevitable.
It doesn't, no.
You know, it feels like a direct consequence of the rejection and the isolation he experienced.
Of how he was treated.
Yeah.
You know, Shelley's not presenting him as this inherently evil being.
Right.
She's showing us how his environment, how he's treated, shapes him into the monster he becomes.
Right. And this is where I think Frankenstein really transcends its time.
It does.
And becomes this timeless commentary on the human condition.
Right. It's a warning about the dangers of othering, of dehumanizing those who are different, of allowing fear to shape our perceptions.
It's a plea for empathy, for understanding.
Absolutely.
For recognizing our shared humanity.
Yes.
That connects all of us.
Right.
Regardless of our outward appearances.
Right.
Because the creature, despite his monstrous exterior, ultimately reflects our own desire for connection, for acceptance, for belonging.
And his story serves as this powerful reminder, you know?
Yeah.
That the choices we make, the way we treat each other, have profound consequences.
Yeah, yeah. It's not just about individual acts of kindness.
Right.
It's about creating a society where empathy and understanding are the norm.
Absolutely.
You know, not the exception.
Absolutely.
A society where we don't allow fear to turn us into the monsters we fear.
The monsters we fear, exactly.
So, so as we wrap up our deep dive into Frankenstein, we're left with this powerful message.
Yes.
Choose compassion over fear.
Absolutely.
Embrace our shared humanity and strive for a world where understanding and acceptance triumph over prejudice and rejection.
Beautifully said.
Because the monsters we create aren't always the ones lurching in the shadows.
Right.
Sometimes they're the ones we become when we fail to see the humanity in others.
That's a great point.
So until next time,
yeah.
Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep those conversations going.
Absolutely. And thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.